Hi, I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts. And this is my week of reading wrap-up where I talk about the books that I read this week, what I'm currently reading, and then potentially could read next week based on my mood. I had an amazing reading week this week. Let me share with you what I completed. The first thing that I read because I kept hearing it described as kind of in the same vein or a sister to, akin to, a book that I absolutely adored that made me bawl my eyes out, and that is The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. This is high concept, very stylized, intellectual, complex and layered story about migration and American migration across the border from Mexico into the United States. This book that I read is not as stylized and complex, but it would be a nice companion piece. And the book is, here we go, Infinite Country, and this is by Patricia Engel. Now, this is my Book of the Month Club option. I've been trying to read through a little bit of my backlist, my Book of the Month Club backlist, because I have a lot of them that I need to get through. I'll put a link to my Book of the Month Club affiliate link below in case you're interested in joining. But this book, even though it deals with really intense subject matter, it starts off with this propulsive beginning where we have this young girl, this teenager Talia, and Talia is breaking out of a correctional facility that she's been held outside of Bogota, a few hours outside Bogota in Colombia. And she has to make her way home to meet up with her father. And they want to flee Colombia to go back to the United States where the rest of the family is. It's a very interesting story because Talia was actually born in the United States, has United States citizenship, but because she was the youngest in the family and the family was struggling, she was sent back to Colombia. So the family has been split apart, and the father has ended up in Colombia. I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't say too much about it. But we get perspectives of Talia, who is just a great, fiery teenage character who just is so resourceful and so smart and thoughtful and really kind of struggling with her place as an American who was sent to Colombia and doesn't really have a relationship with her mother and her siblings there, but adores her father. I loved how the story was told through the characters and what they're going through. I thought it was incredibly well told. It was entertaining at the same time that it was thoughtful. It's not high concept like this one, but it does offer impacts, and it shows you the next things that happen along the chain and how our characters are dealing with that and what they're trying to do given the cards that they've been dealt based on the decisions that have been made along the way. I loved the split between Colombia, Bogota, and the United States, and how the different lives of the different members of the family who ended up in each are different, and the impacts and the things that they wish for and the things that they are envious of the other for having. It's a slim book, fast read, really well done. And I would say another book to go along with this that I enjoyed very much, but it's much more simply told, and this was Domenica by Angie Cruz. This is the story of a teenager who was actually married off and sent from the Dominican Republic to New York City and is there at a pivotal time and just kind of witnessing everything. But I think the three of those are, if you haven't read any of them, any would be good. Domenica is just much more straightforward than the other two, but all are wonderful. So after being delightfully surprised by that, I was let down by the next, oh, and I hate to say this, I wanted to read something for January in Japan. I haven't had a chance to yet, and I knew I had this, and I thought, okay, well, I usually love Kiego Higashino, his series. This is from the Detective Galileo series. This is number 5. And this was translated by Alexander O. Smith and Eiley Alexander. What to say about this? I think this didn't work for me only because I figured it out so early. And look, I'm no sleuth, despite the number of mystery books that I read. So the fact that I got it so quickly and then just had to wait for them to prove my theory right ended up not being not a very satisfying experience, and I didn't find the characters and the intricacies of the personalities in this murder mystery to be that interesting. So for me, this has been the weakest of what is normally just an exemplary detective series. Specifically, just Higashino. I just love how he writes, the simplicity, but how deeply he gets into the character stories. And this one, it just didn't have that same kind of impact for me. So that was a big bummer. Then the next one makes me laugh because it took me ages, almost a year and a half, maybe 2 years to get as far as I am in my Proust Odyssey in Reading in Search of Lost Time. Last week, you saw in my video that I finished volume 4. This week, I finished volume 5. I know, but I can't celebrate because this is a bind up of 5 and 6. So I was so frustrated. I'm like, literally, I finished all of this, but I can't technically mark this off on Goodreads or on the Storygraph because it's this volume or this bind up, this physical book is not yet completed. So I've said previously that I'm very, very happy that I waited till later in my life to read Proust, because so much about Proust is experiential, and it's about, having those feelings and the reminiscences and looking backwards, and it's about the subtleties and the minutia that usually young people just don't take the time to pay attention to, and so with volume 1 and I think a little bit of volume 2, that was really, really valuable for me. But I really wish I had read this as a younger person. It would have saved me from so many crappy, toxic boyfriends. Our narrator is horrible. He's a horror. I don't want to spoil too much of it. I won't use names of characters, but I have to tell you a little bit about what happens. He has basically made a promise to a young woman that he will marry her if she comes back and lives with him in his home while his mother is away, and convinces her. They have a pledge. She believes that they are going to be married and kind of takes up as, in essence, his mistress. He is only doing this because he is insanely jealous of her bisexuality. He's insanely jealous of the looks that she gives other women, and he's convinced that she is in love with other women. And so it's so possessive. He wants to control her and to keep her under his thumb. Once he feels that she's subdued, he starts to look elsewhere. He starts to find himself interested in other things, right? See what I mean about, I could have used this insight much, much, much earlier. So I would say with the last one, which was volume 4, Sodom and Gomorrah, and this one, we are flying through the narrative now. It feels like a plot has come together. It feels like the characters are kind of locked in. We know who we're dealing with, whereas the first 2 volumes and even the third, you're just hit by so many characters. and a new one appears every 100 pages, and it just becomes a lot to absorb. And then now it's about more plot driven, less than it is explaining these characters and their relationships to each other and the setting in Paris. So I thought it was great, and I'm already moving forward with the next part of this book, and I have my heart broken in volume 6, The Fugitive. So this is straddling my completed and my currently reading side of the house. And then Leo of Little Book Life and I knocked this out pretty quickly. This is Hanya Yanagihara's To Paradise. I mentioned that we were going to start reading it last weekend and jumped right in. I have a lot to say about this. Let me start off by saying that I have a mixed review. This is a mixed bag for me. I think thematically, she introduces a lot of interesting concepts. But she also introduces a lot of things that are extraneous, that are complicated, that unnecessarily, I think, complicate the ability to get those messages across. And so therefore, it was an unsatisfactory reading experience. Let me tell you a little bit about it. First, let me also say, and I won't do any spoilers, I promise, but if you're expecting the kind of deep emotional impact from A Little Life, it's not going to be here. She's written a completely different book. So whereas A Little Life went incredibly deep, almost like intimately deep into pain and suffering, and abuse and trauma, this one actually pulls way back, and we get a much bigger lens, more characters, switching timelines, and so you're not going to have that obsessive, painful, uncomfortably close claustrophobic experience as you had with A Little Life. See, I almost said Leo's channel, A Little Book Life. So, different book, completely different. And I would say a little bit to its discredit. Leo and I just finished reading, I think we just talked about it last week, The People in the Trees. Because we wanted to read that in advance of this. The People in the Trees is her first novel. This is her third. Now, I'm going to say that it took a long time for this to come together for me. In fact, it wasn't until over a third into the book, on page 504, did it really start to click for me what we're doing here and what we're reading. That's, in a 700-page book, that's a lot. That's requiring a lot of patience and a lot of trust from your readers. So what is this about? There's 3 sections in this book. The first, and it's kind of divided into 3 timelines. There's two consistencies. One makes sense, the other doesn't. The one that makes sense is that we have this one place, this one address in New York City. It's in Washington Square, and action happens in each of these sections. And so that's kind of our grounding function there. The other thing that does not make sense, and this is so distracting, and I know what she said she was trying to do, but it didn't feel like it worked for me, which was each of these timelines have characters named the exact same thing. We don't really know their last names, or they don't really use their last names, they use their first names. So there's always a David, an Edward, a Charles, sometimes an Eden. And it just kind of gets in the way. Now these 3 sections of the book each have their own corresponding map, and we're introduced to an alternative world. So where some things feel similar, but there are some facts about how these worlds came into being, or the political, social dynamics that are very different than ours. So, and each of these happen at the turn of the century. So she's talking about like time moving and big changes happening in these cultures. The first section is an alternative history. And so New York is a part of its own country. There's the southern states, which have seceded from the Union, and then there's the northern states, and then there's the America. And New York is one of the states that have their own country. I forget what it's called. And this country was founded on utopian principles by in essence, a group founded on the ideas of sexual freedom and liberation. And so it is not illegal for men to, it's not unusual and or illegal for there to be gay marriages. And in fact, many of the people that you are introduced to are gay couples and are married. So you think, oh, this is a elevated culture. Not so fast, because while slavery is not allowed in these states and this nation, Black people do not have rights per se in this country. They are kind of encouraged to mosey on through to get to one of the states and one of the countries that does allow them to have full citizenship rights. So we have an egalitarian state for the few, and in only certain ways, whereas race is still taboo. The next time frame we have is like a modern day, but it's built off of that previous. So it's a continuation of that timeline, not completely separated from that. And it's modern day, and we have a story about the AIDS crisis and death and dying and family, and chosen family and suffering, as she is wont to talk about. We don't go deeply into it, but we just see how these people are reacting to the AIDS crisis. Now, this section is very strange, because then we kind of end that section, still in book 2, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in Hawaii, because one of the characters is from Hawaii. We end up in Hawaii, and there's like this whole backstory that I feel could be shortened into like a couple backstory interjections into the previous narrative and would have been fine. It felt very extraneous to me, incredibly extraneous. So that's that section. The next section is in the future, and it's a dystopian future where there has been a war. There is also a pandemic, actually multiple pandemics happening, one on top of the other. And we are, again, with a family, a gay family that has a child and some friends. And one of the gentlemen is a head researcher at a lab that is working with to prevent and deal with these pandemics that keep popping up. So that's all I'm going to say about the kind of the structure and the plot. The through line is, as I mentioned, is this place, this building, as well as the names that go through it. You can read this in multiple different ways. In fact, Leo and I both did. In one side, it's an ecological warning of global warming and a projection into the future of what could happen. Another one is about the ravages of colonialism and the legacy of that. Another is about societal human rights and what happens when not all rights are maintained and equality is not fairly doled out and codified. Another one is even the psychology of fear on individuals and family units. I'm sure there's a few others that you can come up with, but those were just some of off the top of our head that we could think of. Now, let me talk about the things that are good. It's a fast read. She is a fluid writer. I personally did like the things she was positing about this utopian society kind of evolving or devolving very easily into a dystopian society. And then the not good, or the things that really are kind of, if I do a balanced review and I say, okay, does the good outweigh the things that irked me? It doesn't. So it's too long. It is 700 and something pages. Let's see. Yeah, 704 pages. There's sections that didn't need to be there. There's a lot of introduction of concepts, but I don't feel like it's that she's clearly posited one that we can see all the way through, that it's clean and clear. And she creates these trajectories for characters and then just sets them off, and the ambiguity of those trajectories bothered me. And I don't always need clean ties, but we care about these. But that's one of the good things and things she does really well, is you end up really caring about these characters and what they're going to be attempting. And so to not be able to follow through was very frustrating for me in this case. So for me, I'm glad I read it. I'll be thinking about it. So I do like a book that makes me think, even if I don't enjoy the experience. So even though it was about 700 pages, read it very quickly. And yeah, I'll be thinking about it. But it's not the... I tried not to have expectations going into it. I tried to allow it to stand on its own merits, because I was hearing some things, and I didn't want to be a prosecutorial reader where I'm going in and looking for proof one way or the other to a point of view. So I'm glad I avoided all reviews. But I'm going to put a link to a couple reviews that I found particularly interesting. I'll add those below. And Brandon Taylor, I talked about him last week. I'm going to talk about him again. He wrote a phenomenal essay. This will be the third time I'm reading it, because I keep finding more and I keep needing to read and understand it more. But I'm going to link it below. It's its own long form novella, short story kind of thing. It's a long essay, but it talks a lot about trauma and fiction. I highly advise, if you're interested in criticism and thinking about modern contemporary literature, it's a really interesting read. Very interesting read. Okay, oh my God, my arm. Oh, it hurts. Okay, so that's what I completed, and I'm feeling very proud about that. So I mentioned I'll be continuing on with Proust. Also continuing on, I'll be finishing up, I think probably today, finishing up The Years by Virginia Woolf. And yeah, she's... I liked the last section much better, so we've broken this into 4 sections. I liked the last section a little more. We had a little longer time in each span of years, and we were able to focus on one character a little more. There's a train scene that is just makes me want to travel so badly, that I loved. And there's also a really funny dinner scene where this guy, he's a little out of his element, and he sat next to someone at this dinner table at this fancy party, and she's very young, and he just turns to her and he's like, "Okay, I thought of 3 topics we can talk about." Kind of telegraphing that he has a mission that he has to do in order to get through this, and it just made me laugh so hard. So kudos to you, Virginia Woolf. That'll be something I remember very much from this edition, this book, in our year-long challenge of reading all of her fiction. So I anticipate we'll be able to finish this before the end of January, and then that leaves just one more. I'm still making my way through The Portrait of a Lady by Maria Ganza, and that is translated by Thomas Bunstead. Enjoying it, I just had other things I needed to kind of prioritize a little more, so I'm going to try to get that done this week as well. because next week we get the BookTube prize announcements of the who are the judges and what the lists are. So I put my name in the ring, I think, for both translated and translated fiction as well as just regular fiction. So he said that we have he being Robert from Barter Hordes, who does the BookTube Prize. I'll put a link to his channel below as well as the BookTube Prize channel. He said that we have a very strong number of judges, and so I may not even end up chosen because it's all automated in the system. So we'll see, but I'm trying to kind of clear the decks a little bit so I have a little space, because I can't imagine that I'd have another year like last year where almost every single round I had read more than half of the books that I was assigned already. So I only had like a scant reading to do for the 2 months. I can't imagine I'd be as lucky to do that this year, but you never know. I will let you know. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.